Chapter 1. The Return. The moment Amora stepped off the bus, the scent of wet earth and burning firewood filled her lungs, stirring memories she had long buried. The ochre-colored soil of Umuchi village stretched before her, cracked in places where the dry season had taken its toll. Towering palm trees swayed lazily in the warm breeze, and the distant sound of drumming echoed from the market square. She had been gone for 10 years. A decade since she left behind the shadows of her past, vowing never to return. But fate had other plans. The news had reached her a week ago: people were disappearing. At first, she thought it was just another village rumor, an exaggeration woven into the fabric of local superstition. But the names of the missing sent a chill down her spine. Noji, the fearless hunter. Mama Ifioma, the gentle widow. A young boy, barely 12. One after another, they had vanished, swallowed by the darkness of the unknown. No bodies. No traces. Only whispers of fear lingering in the air like smoke. Amora wasn't one to believe in ghosts or curses. She believed in truth. And as a journalist, it was her job to uncover it. As she adjusted the strap of her satchel, her sharp eyes scanned the village. Not much had changed. The same clusters of round mud huts with thatched roofs, the same narrow footpaths winding between them, the same baobab tree standing at the center of the village like an ancient guardian. But something was wrong. She could feel it in the way the villagers watched her. Not with warmth, not with the open curiosity one would expect for a returning daughter, but with fear. Her footsteps felt heavier as she made her way toward the marketplace. The air was thick with the scent of smoked fish, ripe plantains, and shea butter. Traders called out their wares, their voices overlapping in a melody of commerce. But beneath the routine bustle, there was an underlying tension, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. A woman selling kola nuts met her gaze and quickly looked away. A group of men seated under the baobab tree fell silent as she passed, their whispers barely audible over the market noise. She stopped at a small stall where an elderly woman was tying bundles of pepper leaves with raffia string. "Mama Nkechi," Amara said, her voice steady. "It's been a long time." The woman's hands stilled for a brief moment before she forced a smile. "Amara, you have returned." "I have," Amara said. "And I have questions." Mama Nkechi glanced around nervously. "Child, some questions are better left unasked." Amora's jaw tightened. "People are missing." A shadow flickered across the old woman's face. "Yes. And you should not be here." "Why?" The old woman exhaled, her shoulders slumping. "Because the one who watches does not speak. And those who speak," her voice trailed off. Amora's heartbeat quickened. "The one who watches. You mean Babajide?" Mama Nkechi's lips pressed into a thin line. She hurriedly gathered her goods and turned away. Amora clenched her fist. Babajide. The village mute. The one who had always been there, watching in silence. The one who saw everything, but never spoke a word. Her pulse pounded as she left the marketplace, her feet moving with purpose. If there was anyone who held the answers, it was him. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows across the village as she approached Babajide's hut. It stood at the farthest edge of Umuchi, near the entrance of the forbidden forest. She hesitated for a brief moment before pushing forward. The truth lay beyond that door. And she was ready to face it. Chapter 2. The Silent Man. The path to Babajide's hut was overgrown with weeds, the kind that curled and twisted like grasping fingers. Amora's sandals crunched against the dry earth as she walked, her heart pounding louder with each step. The old man's hut stood alone at the village's edge, its walls made of weathered clay, its thatched roof sagging with age. A small lantern flickered behind the wooden door, casting eerie shadows through the cracks. Amora hesitated before knocking. She had seen Baba Jide many times as a child, sitting under the ancient baobab tree, staring into the distance with those unreadable eyes. He had always been a mystery. They said he was born mute, that he had never spoken a word. But Amora had never believed in accidents. The silence in his throat was not natural. It was forced. Taking a deep breath, she rapped on the door. No answer. She knocked again, harder. Baba Jide. Still nothing. The village was eerily silent behind her. The sun had nearly set, and the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the distant hoot of nightbirds. Just as she was about to turn away, the door creaked open. Baba Jide stood in the doorway, his presence as unsettling as she remembered. He was old, his skin dark and wrinkled like aged leather. A white cloth was draped over his shoulders, and his piercing eyes, clouded yet awake, studied her in silence. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, without a word, he stepped aside, allowing her to enter. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and damp wood. Dried leaves and strange symbols were carved into the walls. A single wooden stool sat in the corner, next to a pile of old scrolls. Baba Jide motioned for her to sit. Amora lowered herself onto the stool, gripping her satchel tightly. You know why I'm here? The old man nodded slowly. People are disappearing, she continued, keeping her voice steady. And I believe you know why. Baba Jide did not react. Instead, he turned and walked to the far side of the hut, where a small wooden box rested on a table. He opened it carefully, his fingers moving with purpose. Amora watched as he pulled out an old, tattered scroll. He laid it before her, pointing to the symbols drawn across its surface. They were ancient, but she recognized them. The mark of the forgotten. Her blood ran cold. She had read about this in her research. The mark of the forgotten was a symbol of an old village curse, one that spoke of those who vanished without a trace. The legend said that long ago, a terrible betrayal had taken place in Umuchi. The spirits of the wronged had never found peace, and so they took vengeance by swallowing the guilty and the innocent alike. It was a story. A myth. But Baba Jide was telling her it was real. You're saying the disappearances are part of this curse, she asked, her voice. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Past. Amora stared at the ancient scroll, her pulse racing. The mark of the forgotten. A symbol tied to an old village curse, one that she had always dismissed as folklore. She looked up at Baba Jide, his weathered face illuminated by the dim glow of the lantern. He nodded slowly, his eyes filled with something ancient, knowing. This doesn't make sense, she murmured, shaking her head. Legends don't make people disappear. Baba Jide turned to the wall behind him, where several symbols had been etched into the clay. He picked up a piece of charcoal and began drawing on the scroll, his movements quick and deliberate. The first symbol, a circle with jagged lines piercing through it. Broken trust. The second symbol, a hand reaching out, but with no fingers. The forgotten ones. The third, a spiral, vanishing into darkness. The price. Amora's throat went dry. You're saying this isn't random, she whispered. The disappearances, they are a consequence of something. Baba Jide nodded. Her mind spun. If the curse was real, then the villagers knew more than they were saying. The fear in their eyes, the whispers that died on their lips whenever she passed, this wasn't just superstition. It was knowledge. Who are the forgotten ones? She asked. Baba Jide's hand hovered over the scroll. His fingers trembled slightly before he tapped the second symbol. Then, slowly, he raised his hand to his lips and made a motion as if sealing his mouth shut. Amora inhaled sharply. Their names can't be spoken, she realized. A long silence stretched between them. She glanced back down at the symbols, trying to piece together the truth. If the disappearances were connected to the forgotten ones, then they weren't just random tragedies. They were deliberate. And that meant... Her stomach twisted. Someone in the village knew who was next. A gust of wind rattled the hut, sending a chill down her spine. She could feel it now, something watching. Something that existed in the spaces between silence. She had come looking for answers. But now, she wasn't sure she wanted to know the truth. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Dark. The night air was thick with silence as Amora left Babajide's hut. The village, once familiar, now felt like a maze of secrets and unseen eyes. The mark of the forgotten lingered in her mind, its meaning pressing against her thoughts like a warning she couldn't ignore. Babajide had given her no names, only symbols that spoke of betrayal, vengeance, and a price that had yet to be fully understood. But she wasn't here to believe in curses. She was here for the truth. As she walked through the village, the full moon cast long, eerie shadows across the narrow pathways. The market stalls were deserted, the clay huts locked tightly. Even the wind seemed hesitant to disturb the stillness. Then she heard it. A faint whisper. Amora stopped, her pulse spiking. She turned her head slowly, scanning the darkened huts. The whisper came again, soft, urgent. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes narrowing at the source of the sound. Behind one of the huts, barely visible in the dim moonlight, a figure stood. A woman, wrapped in a faded wrapper, her face partially hidden by the shadows. "Who's there?" Amara called out. The woman motioned for her to come closer. Everything in Amora's instincts told her to be careful, but something about the urgency in the woman's stance made her step forward. As soon as she was close enough, the woman reached out and gripped Amora's wrist. Her fingers were cold. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Amora swallowed hard. "Then why are you talking to me?" The woman glanced around, as if checking for unseen eyes. Then she leaned in, her breath shaky. "They know," she said. Amora stiffened. "Who?" The woman's lips trembled. "The elders. They know why the disappearances are happening. They know who is next." A chill spread through Amora's body. "Tell me everything." The woman hesitated. "Not here. Meet me by the river at dawn. But come alone." Before Amora could say another word, the woman disappeared into the darkness, swallowed by the village's endless shadows. Amora stood frozen for a moment, her mind racing. If the elders knew, then this wasn't just an ancient curse, it was something deeper, more controlled. Something the village was hiding. She had come back for answers. But now, she was certain, she was uncovering something she wasn't meant to find. Chapter 5. The River's Secret. The first light of dawn crept over Umuchi, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and purple. A mist clung to the earth, rolling in thick waves from the dense forest, settling over the village like a ghostly veil. Amora walked swiftly, her heartbeat matching the rhythm of her hurried footsteps. The woman from last night had given her a meeting point, the river. The Odio River was sacred, its waters said to hold the voices of ancestors. Elders often spoke of its power, of how those who sought the truth would find it reflected in its depths. As she approached, the whispering rush of water filled her ears. The river stretched ahead, dark and endless, its surface rippling under the pale morning light. Trees lined the bank, their twisted roots sinking into the wet earth, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. The air smelled of damp earth and fresh water, and the leaves of the towering trees dripped with morning dew. She was alone. Her chest tightened. What if the woman had changed her mind? Or worse, what if something had happened to her? She took a step closer to the water, scanning the misty landscape. The river was unusually quiet, no birds chirped, no frogs croaked, only the rhythmic sound of flowing water remained. Then, a rustle. Amora spun around, her hands clenched into fists. From the shadows of the trees, the woman emerged, her movements hurried, her eyes darting around as if she expected to be followed. Her wrapper was the same faded fabric from the night before, but now Amora could see her face more clearly. She was young, no older than 30, her cheekbones sharp, her eyes sunken with worry. "You came," Amora breathed, stepping forward. The woman placed a finger to her lips and gestured for Amora to follow her further away from the main path. They walked for a few moments before she finally stopped and turned, her expression grim. "I don't have much time," she said. "They'll be looking for me soon." "Who?" Amora asked, but she already had a sinking feeling she knew the answer. The woman swallowed, then said in a low voice, "The elders." Amora felt her stomach tighten. She had suspected the village elders were hiding something, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. "They know what's happening, don't they?" Amora pressed. The woman nodded. "They always have. The disappearances aren't random. They are chosen." Amora's breath hitched. "Chosen." The woman's hands trembled as she reached into the fold of her wrapper and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of cloth. She held it out. Amora hesitated before taking it. As soon as her fingers brushed the fabric, she felt it rough, worn, and damp. She unfolded it carefully and gasped. There, drawn in dark ink, was the mark of the forgotten. "This," she whispered. "They mark the ones who would disappear," the woman said, her voice barely above a breath. "Each month, one person is chosen. Their name is never spoken again. It is as if they never existed." A cold chill ran down Amora's spine. She had come looking for a story, but she had stumbled upon something far worse. "How do they choose?" she asked. The woman shook her head. "I don't know. But it has been this way for generations. The village survives because of it." Amora clenched her jaw. "That's why no one speaks of them. That's why everyone is afraid." The woman nodded, her eyes darting behind Amora. "I shouldn't be telling you this. If they find out I spoke to you." She trailed off, but Amora understood. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. The woman inhaled deeply before responding. "Because I lost someone." Her voice cracked. "My sister. She was marked. She vanished a year ago. And I have spent every moment since then wondering why." Amora's heart ached at the grief in her voice. "You don't have to be silent anymore," she said softly. "If we expose this." "No," the woman's eyes darkened with fear. "You don't understand. They will do anything to protect this secret. You need to leave this village." Amora opened her mouth to protest, but the woman suddenly stiffened. Her eyes went wide, her breath hitching in her throat. Amora turned sharply. A shadow moved between the trees. Someone was watching them. The woman's grip tightened around Amora's wrist. "Go. Now." "But." "Go." Fear surged through Amora's veins as she turned and sprinted back toward the village. Her heart pounded against her ribs, her breath coming in sharp gasps. She didn't dare look back. She ran until she reached her hut, slamming the door shut behind her. Her hands trembled as she clutched the piece of fabric with the mark of the forgotten. She now had proof. But she also had a target on her back. And she was no longer sure if she would make it out of Umuchi alive. Chapter 6. The Silent Witness. Amora sat in the dim corner of her hut, gripping the fabric with the mark of the forgotten as if it were her last thread of sanity. The air inside felt suffocating, thick with the weight of fear and unanswered questions. Outside, the village stirred. The morning market had begun, voices rising in cheerful chatter, as though the darkness lurking beneath their lives didn't exist. But she knew. She knew what they were hiding. She knew someone had seen her at the river. And she knew that she was in danger. A sharp knock on her door made her flinch. She hesitated before slowly standing up, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the door and cracked it open just enough to see outside. Baba Jide stood there. His old, weathered face was lined with urgency, his dark eyes warning her of something unspoken. Without a word, he motioned for her to follow him. Amara hesitated. "I don't think." The old man shook his head sharply and gestured again, his movements desperate. She swallowed hard and nodded, stepping out. He led her through the narrow village pathways, away from the market and toward the thick forest at the edge of Umuchi. "Where are we going?" she whispered. Baba Jide didn't answer. They walked for what felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. The trees loomed overhead, their twisted branches casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. Amora's breath came in uneven gasps as the unease inside her grew. Then, they reached it. A clearing. In its center stood a stone altar, covered in dried blood. Amora's stomach twisted. "This is where they take them," Baba Jide signed, his hands moving with precision. "The forgotten ones." Amora's throat went dry. She stepped closer, feeling the weight of centuries pressing against her chest. The ground was littered with old bones. Fragments of cloth clung to the surrounding trees, swaying eerily in the breeze. She turned to Baba Jide, horror washing over her. They killed them." The old man nodded solemnly. A sob caught in Amora's throat. "Why?" Baba Jide hesitated, then pointed at the mark of the forgotten on the cloth in her hands. "The curse is real," he signed. "But it is not what they say. It is not the spirits who take them." "Then who?" Baba Jide's face darkened. "The elders." Amora felt her knees weaken. The village elders, the ones who sat in judgment, the ones who claimed to protect the people, they were the ones behind the disappearances. She suddenly remembered the woman's words at the river. "They always have. The village survives because of it." She turned back to Baba Jide. "How long?" she whispered. The old man sighed deeply. "Since before my time." A chilling realization washed over Amora. It was a sacrifice. The elders had convinced the village that the disappearances were a curse, but in truth, they were offerings. Every month, a villager was chosen, marked, and taken to this place, to be killed. "For power," she whispered. "For control." Baba Jide nodded. Her hands clenched into fists. "This has to stop," she said, her voice firm. "I have to tell the world." The old man grabbed her wrist, shaking his head violently. "No," he signed. "They will never let you leave." A twig snapped behind them. Amara froze. Baba Jide's eyes widened with fear. They weren't alone. Before she could react, strong hands grabbed her from behind. A rough cloth was shoved over her mouth, muffling her scream. The scent of herbs filled her nose, something strong, something that burned her lungs. Her vision blurred. She struggled, kicking wildly, but the darkness swallowed her whole. She woke up to the sound of crackling fire. Her head throbbed, her body felt heavy. The air was thick with the scent of burning wood and something metallic, blood. She was no longer in the forest. She was in the village square. A massive bonfire burned in the center, its flames reaching toward the sky. Around it, the villagers had gathered, their faces solemn, their eyes dark with something she couldn't place. Then she saw them. The elders. They stood in a line, their ceremonial robes swaying in the wind. The oldest among them, a man named Chief Okonko, stepped forward. His eyes locked onto hers. "You have seen too much," he said, his voice deep and commanding. And you have spoken to those who should remain silent. Amora's breath hitched. Babajide. The woman at the river. Had they been caught too? She turned her head frantically, searching the crowd. But she didn't see them. Then she noticed something. The villagers weren't looking at her with fear. They were looking at her with pity. Dread pulled in her stomach. They had already accepted what was about to happen. You have broken the sacred balance of Umuchi, Chief Okonkwo continued. And now, the gods must be appeased. Amora struggled against the ropes binding her wrist, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. No, she choked out. This isn't about the gods. It's about you. You have been killing innocent people for years. The chief's expression didn't change. This is the way of our people, he said simply. And tonight, you will become one of the forgotten. The villagers lowered their heads. No one would save her. The flames roared. Amora screamed. No one spoke of her again. The village of Umuchi continued as it always had. And in the shadows of the forest, the altar remained. Waiting. For the next name. For the next sacrifice. For the next silent witness. Thanks for watching. Kindly subscribe to Arab African Folktales for more interesting videos.